I don't know. I don't know anything. I don't claim to know anything.
Do you want to tell the podcast world about
Who we are?
pulling a muscle and
Oh. You want me to begin that way by
having
telling them about...
gaseous things happen afterwards?
No, those are intimate secret. I just kicked the dog. Those are intimate secrets that I'd rather keep to myself.
All right.
Nobody needs to know about that.
We learned something new this week, though.
What's that?
You can pull a muscle, and it can make you burp. Never knew that was a thing.
If you want a quick end to story time, long ago, one of my brothers had a flat tire, and I drove over to Belmont Abbey College because he was attending there at the time, and I attempted to help him change this tire, and the car that he was driving had very rusted bolts on the tire. And there was a point in time where I treated my body like He-Man, and no task was insurmountable.
I know this story.
But I remember pulling one of those bolts with everything that I had in my body.
Ugh.
And the bolt came off, but it was like there's a rubber band from the back of my, like the base of my skull, then went all the way down my right arm. And it was like just this crazy tingling rubber band sensation.
The bolt came off, but so did the rubber band in your body.
And seemed to just be able to shake it off and go on with my life. But I think it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that same, I guess the next morning, I was going to say the same night, but the next morning, I woke up out of a sound sleep hiccuping. And
oh, I thought the hiccup started right away in my remembering of the story. You went a little while with just thinking everything was normal.
yeah.
Wow.
And just wound up hiccuping, like on and off. And I would get rid of them, and then they would come back, and I'd get rid of them. Initially, it was kind of funny, but this began to persist for days.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to freak out and ended up going to see a doctor, which I don't love doing. But in this case, he was a parishioner at the local church that we went to. And so I felt a little bit more comfortable with that. But he took a look and he said, you've hurt your vagus nerve a little bit. After looking at things and doing some tests, it's not like I snapped it or anything. Like I didn't break it, because then I don't think I would be walking around or talking. But I hurt it enough that it started causing muscle spasms, which in this case were hiccups. And he said I was really lucky because sometimes people hurt themselves to an extent where they have the hiccups for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I think the vagus nerve runs the whole length of your body.
Oh, it's nuts.
I think you can look at like a diagram of it online, and it's like, whoa. If it had been worse.
Never even would have known what it is, except for that happening. So I think every valuable lesson that I've learned has either come through some type of accident or dire life consequence. So
it's the only way to learn.
just feel like one day when I'm old and can't stand up, I'll be sitting around a fire and I'll call the children in a place and tell them life lessons.
Yeah.
And then they'll all mock me. But then they'll all have to go through it themselves. Oh boy.
I'm thinking of various things that have happened, and I'm like, wow, you have had some stuff happen. Save that for another installment.
So I'll have to do some editing here, but at nearly 4.5 minutes into this conversation, I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room and say that I'm Ryan.
I'm Jessie.
And this is the Something About Catholics podcast. Why are we saying this? Because we've gotten some feedback and taken it to heart and are trying to organically interject a little bit of an introduction into our everyday podcast. So we'll continue to do this.
Yes.
Until we get feedback that it's annoying, and then we'll take it out.
No.
Why not?
We'll take the feedback in and we'll adjust it.
We'll adjust.
If it's weird.
Tune it like an engine.
Mm-hmm. Just not a rubber band.
To add to that, today's topic is why prayer? Coming up with topics for discussion is not, it's not that it's difficult, but what I would say that's kind of been interesting about this is when you start researching a topic regarding something in the Catholic faith or even Christian faith,
Mm-hmm.
there's like two ways to look at everything. You can wade a little bit into a puddle and scratch the surface,
Yeah.
and we could talk about something for 45 minutes to an hour. Or you could spend a little extra time researching, and then all of a sudden you're deep diving. You're going down to the Titanic levels of learning and pulling material, and there really is no perfect through line. And so,
But we're trying to keep in mind people's wanting to listen to us that long.
yeah, it's this delicate balance of how deep do you want to go into theology versus maybe we just answer the question.
Yeah.
And then if people want to hear more, if there's feedback that maybe we take this further, or maybe we revisit something in a little bit deeper capacity, then we'll go that route. But
We want feedback. So if you're listening on one of the platforms that has a space for comments, we want comments. And then if you're listening and you want to just email us anything, any thoughts, we'll put that in the description too.
do you have the email address handy? You could even spell it out for people.
It's something about Catholics with an S on the end at gmail.com.
Oh man. Easy as that, right?
Yes, we want to talk.
I feel like you came up with today's topic, and I'm giving you that credit because when we initially started this podcast venue, you were in the Adoration Chapel next to me, and you were furiously scribbling through a little notebook that you had, all of the topics that were coming to your mind.
Yeah, it was kind of cool.
And when I was looking through all of the different ones, for whatever reason today, this one kind of popped out to me.
Thanks. Glad you chose it. Seems like you have some good stuff to talk about.
We'll see. That remains to be seen. Why prayer? I can't tell you why sometimes things pop out to me, but I do feel like following the discussion on the rosary, which is actually going to drop today, there's probably more to it regarding prayer. And so,
People will hear our secrets now.
what secrets?
The day that this drops, that the day that the rosary episode drops, that we're recording this one.
I have to be careful about saying things like that because there are other podcasts that I listen to where they'll say something like that and then have to come back and amend whatever they've said because things didn't work out the way that they initially planned or thought they were going to work
Today,
out.
we actually decided to drop a different episode.
Hot off the topic of the rosary and my newfound respect for it, it does call into question, though, why prayer?
Mm-hmm.
In a previous life, and I often have to remind myself why it's not wasted time, it seemed like a little bit of a wasted effort. I call to mind something that my mom often said, and it was to the effect of, we can't look at God like a vending machine. I cannot tell you how many times I heard that growing up in relationship to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And to your credit, you've often echoed something similar. I think you've taken it a bit of a step further and said, when you're praying, there's so much more than just asking God for something in a time of need. It's really about creating and cultivating a relationship.
And that seems like it's been a journey for me to figure that out. Because it's only recently that I've thought about taking time in prayer to implement quiet time into that as well. Because there's a difference between what you and I talk about sometimes and saying, I'm talking to God, but I'm not hearing anything back. And actually spending time in prayer and thinking about what I want to be thankful for, what I want to pray about, and then allowing some time afterwards for some quiet. And I'm not saying I hear God in that quiet every single time I do that, but because I'm starting to add that quiet time that I haven't added before, it feels like I have had benefit in that. It's like I'm listening. I have a sense of peace that I've spent that time in quiet in case there's a feeling that I'm supposed to have or a phrase that's supposed to be put into my brain, my consciousness. And then after I've spent that time in prayer and then some quiet, I think I'm finding that I have instances later in the day where I go, oh, this experience that I'm having right now relates back to something that I was praying about. And it connects it together for me when I haven't really been doing that previously.
There's a gentleman that I am really good friends with, and I just spoke to recently. We got into a discussion about the rosary and even more so about prayer in general. He actually was talking to me about how he's doing this thing called the 5-finger prayer. And basically every one of your fingers on your hand is kind of a different aspect of it, right? And so the way that you look at it is the thumb is for those who are closest to you and your family. Your pointer finger is for those who might point you in the right direction, like teachers or priests. And you pray for wisdom with that. The tallest or middle finger for those who lead us, and to pray for guidance, like the president or our world leaders. The ring finger is for those that are weak and sick or are in trouble or need healing. And then the pinky are prayers for ourselves. And he was on his way out the door. This is crazy because we were talking late last week and thinking about Lent and thinking about what to give up for Lent or what to add to our Lenten plate. And he began to talk about how he and his wife were just on their way out the door to deliver food to the homeless. And I'm like, man, I am really not doing enough if somebody's doing this. But he's like, yeah, I just got back from taking out the trash and I did this 5-finger prayer. And it's just an easy thing for me to do when I'm doing these little menial tasks. So I can just keep things like in perspective. And he said that in line with the rosary. And he's like, man, it's just really makes you think about things. It really makes you put stuff in a perspective. It's so powerful.
Also sounds like it would be grounding.
Yeah, grounding.
Starting to spiral.
Speaking of spiraling, right? So when we talk about prayer, I think I've mentioned in the past how my brain works and how it often functions a little bit like a pinball machine. I get distracted very, very, very easily. Whether it's sitting in church after Mass or in the Adoration Chapel, I think sometimes I walk away feeling exhausted versus feeling spiritually refreshed. It calls into question a little bit about prayer, like why do it?
Yeah.
Because if you go in and spend the time with God, if you actually commit to the time of praying or spending time in quiet, and it doesn't even have to be in church or in the Adoration Chapel, but just spending that time in quiet, and maybe you're not getting something out of it. I think I also couple that with the point that at the center of it all, if God really is all-knowing and knows where we're going to wind up, what's the point? I know these are all little dire questions, but if there's a divine plan and we simply fit into that plan, what's the point of even asking anything? When I begin to think about this and ruminate on it, which is a nasty habit of mine, I fall back on the saints and I consider these imperfect people that often led wild and sometimes tortured lives, but yet they all have these great redemption stories about operating on faith and knowing that there was a higher power. And so, as an example, St. Augustine, he was a wild child at heart, and even after converting, had moments in his teaching on confessions. He often spoke of praying and doubting, wondering if there was a God, or if God could really forgive someone like him, pleading, "Give me chastity," but not yet. Half praying, half doubting he could change. And God did answer. And St. Augustine ultimately became a bishop, writing some of the concrete cornerstone theology like City of God, which has helped shape Christianity as we know it.
Reminds me of the quote from Mark chapter 9, "The Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." It's where a father is pleading with Jesus to heal his son. And it just goes to show that unbelief isn't some sort of failure on our part. It's something that we can investigate or pray about for ourselves. We only have to go to God honestly in times of doubt versus taking the doubt to outside sources. Like in life, when you could instantly just take that thought captive and go to God with it, versus when you're taking it to like, oh, I'm going to go shopping or go get a drink or do something like that instead to fill the space with it. If we started with some sort of phrase like this when we feel lost, it seems like it's almost like something that's there for us that we don't always take advantage of.
I like that. I like that saying, or that piece of scripture rather, "The Lord, I believe, help my unbelief."
Yeah, I like it too. And it helps me remember that we don't always know better, that God knows better, and we really can run to God with whatever it is. We don't have to shoulder whatever stress or burden on our own.
I think it comes back to the phrase "offer it up," something I have to keep reminding myself of day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is St. Therese of Lisieux. And she was somebody that had many dark nights. So if you want to put that into perspective, she was actually battling tuberculosis at the tail end of her life and started to wrestle with doubts about the fact that heaven might exist or might not exist. And in her writings, it almost suggested that she was in kind of a fog. And she was tempted to think about the fact that there was nothing after death. And yet, despite all those things, she continued to pray and continued to have faith.
I like how it makes the saints more human, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think if we look at them as role models and we look at these look at these saints, look at these saintly human beings as not only role models, but people we want to try to mirror, right? They are folks that live these somewhat flawed lives and have these incredible redemption stories.
Yeah, they're always trying to conquer it, the flawed portions of themselves.
And yet we look to them as these great examples of leaders in the church who went on to write theology or become doctors of the church or did so many good things through their writings and their stories and their foundation building that have really shaped what the Catholic Church is today.
Yeah. I think sometimes I at least have a tendency to put them on a pedestal. And I think that we sometimes think we can't achieve the same things that they did. And it helps with these examples to have instances where they had doubts in times of darkness or feeling far away from God, just like we do.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it because back then, you remove all of the creature comforts that we have. Um, Everything from cell phones down to refrigerators or even washing machines. And you just think about like how the communal aspect, I guess, has changed over time. And when you're going through doubt, when you're going through these dark periods in time where you're doubting faith, you can't do a Google search, or you can't call somebody on a phone, right? You might not even be able to reach out to, say, a priest to talk about it, or a spiritual director.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about struggling. That's some very crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting the difference between, like, if you think about like back in the day before there were all those distractions to a certain degree, and now we have more distractions, but we also have more opportunities to like be able to go on Google and research something that we're struggling with. And it almost, like, on either side of it, you can find a way to either be closer to God or you can be farther away. Like either way, with the distractions or without them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
the advances, I guess, in technology.
Yeah. I mean, you can get on a video chat with a counselor, or you can Google or look on the internet for a closed parish where you could potentially go meet with a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a hop, skip, and a jumping away. I mean, most of the time, right? I mean, it's very convenient, but...
Yeah, or getting a car versus being in a monastery way out somewhere waiting for your carriage or your horse, or to walk somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, imagine...
And we don't take advantage of things to our benefit. Sometimes we use them to our... Oh, what's the opposite of benefit?
Detriment.
Yeah.
True.
It also makes me think of the quote from St. Padre Pio, who said, "Jesus is with you even when you don't feel his presence. He is never so close to you as he is during your spiritual battles. He's always there, close to you, encouraging you to fight your battle courageously. He's there to ward off the enemy's blows so that you may not be hurt." I just thought that quote was awesome, coming from him with all of the experiences that he went through. He was a friar and a priest who's known for his profound spiritual experiences, including receiving the stigmata. If you're wondering what the stigmata is, it's a mystical participation in the suffering of Christ that displays itself in actual wounds, making the recipient a kind of living representation of the crucified Christ. Padre Pio also experienced bilocation, so he could be in more than one place at one time.
Which is crazy.
All of his stories about St. Padre Pio. And the ability to read souls, or clairvoyance as we know it. And for numerous miracles, healings, and divine encounters. I just thought if he experienced all of that just from his relationship with the Lord and still said his presence is never so close to you as he is during your spiritual battles or when you don't feel him, that's truly something.
Yeah, I know. Padre Pio is one of those interesting saints that there's so many great stories about. I would say, like, from my perspective, Padre Pio is interesting because he's one of those saints that truly represents to me the in-between of the divine and mystical and lay people.
Yeah.
And maybe lay people isn't even the right word, but when I look at Padre Pio, there's so many accounts of him fighting off or warding off demons and like the stigmata, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking about.
Bleeding from those same wounds that we believe Christ had.
Like, he experienced the super closeness to God, and then he also experienced the times of great desolation, like being so far from that too. So I would take his word as something that I can hold on to when I feel that.
And he's also human, right? I mean, so that's looking at somebody like that semi-relatable. I've never had the stigmata, but like, he's a human being that lived, right? And not that far away or far removed from where we are now in the history of the country and the history of the world.
Yeah.
Right? So I find that very, very interesting.
It is.
One of the biggest examples is probably St. John of the Cross. And I used to work at a Catholic book publishing company, and I can tell you that one of the best-selling books that we had was his work of Dark Night of the Soul. I was often warned that it's not a casual read. It was one of those books that if you were to pull it off the shelf, you really had to be in a certain state of mind and a certain state where you almost was warned, like, if you pull this book off the shelf and you start to read it, don't be surprised if God amps things up a little bit as far as like that balance of good and evil, and it's kind of an interesting thing.
It's interesting.
In St. John, he would go into deep prayer seeking God, and he would be met with silence. And why this is maybe a little different than normal is he felt abandoned, doubting that he'd have any kind of connection with God again. So imagine having a connection with God and then getting into this rhyme or rhythm of praying and then doubting in that connection. You start to lose that feeling. His continued prayer was more of a surrender, though, not a plea for answers. And in Dark Night of the Soul, he kind of maps out how doubt strips you down to pure faith. And I just think that that's remarkable, to take something that's otherwise like pure torture and turn it into this miraculous kind of, it's almost like purgatory in a sense, right? If we believe that purgatory is where people could wind up before going to heaven, it's like a cleansing of the soul, right? We go to purgatory as a way of performing kind of like a final penance so that our soul is totally clean and we can enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think similarly about what St. John of the Cross is saying here. He's feeling this doubt. He's so deep in prayer, and he's feeling this doubt, and he's got nothing to rely on except pure faith. And I think it's very similar in that way.
I think you and I have had a lot of experiences where we just have to rely on pure faith also.
Yes.
Experiences that strip you down to just that. And if you don't have that and you don't focus on that, then you can go to a lot of dark places. So it reminds me of that. I'm not saying that we have this down perfectly at this point, but it does feel like in attempting to talk about these things together, pray together, and offer things up to God, that we have cracked some sort of code that parents and teachers and priests and various other Christian people that we know have tried to explain to us in different ways. And it feels like only something that we could have gotten to through our own trial and error. Do you feel that way?
Oh, yeah. No question about it. I don't know how I would, gosh, we talk about this divine plan and having faith. And I maintain the thought that I think there's multiple pathways in life. We live in a fallen world. We have free will. We have the ability to do right and wrong. We have the ability to do good and bad. We have the ability to raise up certain things on one pedestal and lower things on another, right? And it ultimately shapes the way our lives play out. It ultimately shapes the way our fate plays out at the end of the day.
Yep.
I think there's likely a world where maybe we haven't gone through some of the trials and tribulations that we have gone through as a married couple. And I don't know if we would be doing this podcast right now. But
might not feel called to it.
No, maybe not. Maybe not. I still marvel at the fact that we are doing this. but you go through these lived experiences, that phrase that I hate so much, and you just don't know how you're being shaped. In being shaped a certain way, you're being asked to have faith. I think it's up to you as to whether or not you answer that call and take the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, I never want to sound pompous, but I feel like I'm being tugged into a path, and it's the path that we're currently on. And I feel like we build each other up to continue on this path.
I agree.
So for whatever it's worth.
Reminds me of my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So it's from Matthew chapter 11. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And it occurs to me that through doing all of the things you just mentioned, praying together and trying to give everything over to God versus struggling against it, there is a sense of calmness in our marriage that I myself am going, I don't want to lose this. So let's remember that these things are helping and continue on this path. And then just in that specific quote, "For I am gentle and humble in heart," is interesting to me because I have a mental picture of God standing right there next to you going, I'm not gonna, you have free will like you're talking about, and I'm not gonna crash through and interrupt what you're doing, but like, I'm here. It's your choice if you want to involve me in this or not. And the next thing you're doing in life. And it just, I think that's a beautiful picture. It's up to God ultimately, but it's up to us how we
take it and live it.
Yes. And if we're making a conscious choice to give everything back to God, feels like it's the key to me.
Just as long as it's not like one of those pictures of like one of the baseball player that's like in the dugout and like Jesus is behind him with like his hand on his shoulder. Do you remember that whole series of pictures?
No.
I'll have to show you them sometime. They're kind of amazing.
Okay.
But it was like this painter, and I wonder if it was even the same one, but they're like ultra realistic pictures of people doing, I was going to say mundane, but playing baseball isn't really mundane.
No.
But just that different activities like that. And like Jesus is behind him with his like hand on the person's shoulder.
Like he was always there.
Yeah.
Even if the person was not, it's just like if you want to check in or not.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I even saw these. So I have to go find those because they're kind of amazing.
It's reminding me of the pictures of like, it's another picture thing. The world is full of memes now, but I think it's a little girl who's like looking at Jesus and she's like, "This is all that I have." And she has like I think she has a tiny teddy bear and she's trying to give it to Jesus. And Jesus is like, I think it's a representation of her heart. And he has like a even bigger bear behind his back. One you're currently showing me is Jesus with a big, huge smile helping somebody bat. So there's no request that's too small is what I'm getting from this. Jesus, help me with blank. There is no request that's too small.
I kid you not. I actually saw these at a church. I cannot remember where, though. It's probably when I was up in New Jersey.
The church actually had them on the wall?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Was it like in a classroom or something?
I mean, it was in their hall. Like maybe there were classrooms connected to the hall. But yeah, it was one of those.
Could you imagine if you were actually sitting in church and you saw these pictures?
No, that stuff's not good for me.
You wouldn't be able to focus. Okay, so back to the ABD.
Back to prayer, right?
Oh, yes, that too.
So how do I think about prayer and why prayer? Giving those examples of saints and people that we can hope to one day emulate in a way that gets us into heaven. What does it mean for somebody like me? Well, maybe I need to rethink prayer. Okay, fine. But how do I start doing that? So I circle back a little bit to the God not being a vending machine. But here's where there's something interesting that I hadn't put into perspective. And this adds a little of the, I think the word is zhuzh, to our previous conversation about the rosary.
Zhuzh it up.
Yep, zhuzh it up. So it goes back to our previous conversation about the rosary and how it's made up of so many great, powerful prayers. The Our Father. The prayer literally begins with Our Father. God isn't a vending machine. He's literally our Father.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the Aramaic language, Abba. But if you think about Father, it's intimate, almost like talking to family. But by adding the layer of in heaven, God's not just close, but he's holy, he's majestic. And then if you couple this with hallowed be your name, or thy name, hallowed is almost like holy or set apart. So what we're saying is, your name is honored and revered.
Mm-hmm.
Take this another step further. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 9, the Sermon on the Mount, we're taught, this is how you are to pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. God is literally giving us a blueprint for praying, and we literally pray this every time we celebrate Mass or we say the Rosary. And also of note, when we're talking about praying, in verses 5 through 8, Jesus says two very important things. But I'm going to read 4 verses, so stick with me. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners so that others may see them. Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. In praying, do not babble like pagans, who think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. So, 2 things I kind of take away from that. One is, when you're praying to God and you're connecting this lifeline that we just talked about, when you're praying the Our Father, when you're speaking directly to God, don't make a show of it.
Don't need to zhuzh it up.
You don't need to zhuzh it up. And he's also telling us not to babble, not to pad it with words, but to be clear about what we're asking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I take away from those 4 verses.
It's helped me a lot to think of God already knows what you need. You do have I should speak for myself. I have a tendency to babble.
It's okay.
Oh,
I do
yeah.
too.
And then there's this. Oh yeah. And then there's this. I also want to, okay. God already knows what I need.
You
It's
could
just
pray
the-
for infinity.
And beyond. Do we need to cut that out for copyright issues?
You can keep going.
I just like that you don't need to keep going and going and going. God already knows what you need. I think it's the act of starting out in an honest attempt, and the blueprint of having the Our Father is something that I think a lot of us often forget. It's literally right there, written for us. When you pray, start with.
It is. And I think one of the pieces that I get stuck on with prayer is, I said it when we were talking about the Rosary, and I'll say it again. There are so many resources on prayer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, where do I begin?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make it my own?
Yes.
And what I think is fascinating about the Our Father is, during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is actually telling us how to approach God,
Mm-hmm.
right? Starting with the relationship. So we're saying Our Father, adding that reverence in of hallowed be thy name. It's creating a lifeline directly to God, which is why it fits so perfectly into the Mass and the Rosary. I think that after researching this and talking about it, if somebody was like, well, where do I start praying? I think it's a perfectly good place to begin praying.
It is.
Because it opens up the door. It's almost like training wheels, if you will.
Connects you to heaven too by its wording.
Well, and it came directly from the man himself, capital M.
The man.
One more thing.
What?
And I want to go back to something that you talked about and kind of close the loop on it. There's a little quandary that we brought up earlier about why pray if God is all-knowing and knows what's going to happen to each of us.
Mm-hmm.
God knows what we need before we ask, right? That's what you said earlier.
Yes.
Another way that I would look at that is, just like a parent, you may know what your son or daughter wants, but you still want them to learn to ask for it, rather than simply assuming you'll do it for them. So thinking back to our good friend St. Augustine, he's quoted in the Catechism of the Catholic Church saying, God created us without us, but he did not will to save us without us. Salvation isn't a solo act. And I continue to think about the fact that we live in a fallen world and have free will. And God wants us to get to heaven, but we also have to want to get there. And it's why I think prayer is so important.
Yep. Makes sense.
And that's all I got.
Good things to think about in relation to prayer. The salvation isn't a solo act. The thought that we don't have to do it all alone. Even if we don't feel Jesus, he is always listening and he's always there and he hears us. We just have to pray, give it to him, and take the next step in faith.
It's not always easy.
No, it's not.
But I think it's why we have people like the saints that we just highlighted before. And there's countless other saints too that we didn't even mention that have gone through these periods of doubt.
And examples from the Bible that we talked about too. And having little phrases or mantras that are representations of that seem like helpful places as well. Like the Lord, I believe, help my unbelief and things like that. If only we had short little things like that to go back to every once in a while when we go from situation in life to wanting to do anything but pray.
Which is almost always. Yeah. Words to live by for sure.
Good topic.
Good topic.
Good job.
Thanks for writing it down.
Right now. Thanks for the cred.